Hello, everyone. It is your girl, Miss Natalie B, and it's Friday. Let's check the time. It's Friday at 6 p.m., so you already know what it is. It's Free Your Mind Fridays with the Healing Academy, and I'm super excited to be back with you guys yet again on a lovely, lovely Friday. I don't know where you are, but today here in Chicago, there was like 2 seconds worth of snow, and it was beautiful. That's my favorite kind of snow because it goes right away and it doesn't stick to the ground. So I hope you guys are enjoying the day, whatever the weather may be, wherever you are. But it's Free Your Mind Friday, y'all. And as we do every Friday, we are talking to an amazing artist. But in particular, this week, our topic is history. Last week, it was literacy. We talked to Chanel Lane about her literacy journey. And the post question was, when did you fall in love with literacy? And so this week, it is all about history and the importance of history. So we have a very special guest today, and I'm super excited because we have these conversations all the time, and they're always informative and they're always so deep. And so I am really excited to introduce you all to Mr. William North, also known as Will North, our guest for today. So hello, Will. There you are. How are you?
Good. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I am great. Again, I'm super excited to have you here with us today. And we're going to talk about it as we talk about it often. I told Will before we got on, I'm like, oh, we're just going to have the same conversations we have just with people listening this time. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop those down in the comments. We're talking about history and the importance of history, knowing our own history, and then not only knowing our history, but sharing that with ourselves, our families, our friends, the culture at large. And the importance of that. So, Will, before we jump into the conversation fully, can we tell the people about you, what you do, and your
Sure.
artistry?
Okay, yeah, definitely. So again, as Natalie, mentioned, my name is Will North. I'm a cultural worker based in Houston, Texas. I center the Gulf Coast kind of in my artistic work and in my practice. I have a great relationship with Chicago. I studied and obtained my MFA from School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I graduated during this time of all this turmoil. But I'm based in Houston, and I've been working with the University Museum at Texas Southern University. I've been volunteering there for a number of years, and I recently joined the team there as registrar collections management. And what that does is there's a permanent collection at that museum. And so my role is to help protect that artwork. And, in addition to administrative tasks like allowing or supporting loans that are made from the collection to the collection, when another museum, say for example, another museum like in Washington, D.C. wants to borrow a piece of our artwork, they'll contact our staff, and then I'll be the one to put together the documents to do that. Or if somebody bequeaths an artwork, say somebody is retired, they've had this work for 40, 50 years, they then leave the piece to us. And so I need to create records for that. And so really excited to be there and to help support the work that they're doing.
Awesome. And Will and I actually met at the Southside Community Arts Center, speaking of some amazing history and knowing our history. And so one of the first conversations we've ever had was about our history and knowing our history and the importance of our history. So it's really fitting that you're here with us today to talk further on that. And thank you for doing your part in preserving our history and sharing it to the world. So my first question to you is, and it's the question that I've coined that I'm posing to all of my guests now, but in different ways. But when did you fall in love with our history?
Oh, that's a great question. So I've been engaged with it my entire life. I don't think there's ever been a point where I didn't connect with art and with history. So as I was growing up, I just loved watching like documentaries about like ancient Egypt, things like that. So like on History Channel. And then but then also as a child, I was always going to libraries. I was going to bookstores. And so what I would do is I would just wander around the libraries and the bookstores and look for books. And just naturally, I'd look for books that had people on it, that had people that looked like me and you on it. And that was always attractive to me. And so the two, I see them together, like I see art and art history together. So these books that I would look at, I'd see, that there's a whole tradition of Black print culture that we'll probably get into later. But, especially if we go into like the 1960s, there's a lot of publishing houses that came out of that time, and they really centered images of people that look like you and me. Or there'd even be images of the Bible, and Jesus would have the cool little hair, the Jerry curl looking hair and everything.
Not the Jerry curl.
That was what I grew up seeing, because we go to the bookstores. Anytime I travel with my parents, where we go to Atlanta, we go to the bookstores. We go to Houston, I'd be in Houston, I'd go to Afrocentric bookstores or whatever, and you'd see that. And so that was normative to me. That was normal. That's just what I expected to see. And then I go just anywhere and I'd see those images, and I wanted to have a better understanding of it. And so art helped me to have a better understanding of history. It was kind of a bridge to having to really connecting with the past in a unique way. That was interesting. And really my interest in history kind of comes from me wanting to have a context or trying to have a better understanding of the context of my own existence. So operating and walking through the world, how do I move through the world, and what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my family and my larger community? How did we get into this situation, whatever that is? And so I wanted to understand what came before me. So
we cannot rush past that. I don't know. I had to on that one. You pieced me up with that one. We cannot rush past that. So your passion and intrigue in history. Can you just say that one more time? And then I really want to dive deeper into that. It was wanting to get an understanding of
what came before, but it was really just a desire to understand the context of my own existence. We were born into this world. We were all born into this world, and we didn't create it, so we all want to understand it. So how did we arrive at this place? Why are we living wherever we're living? How did we arrive here? And so I think when we ask those kinds of questions and try to get answers, we might ask the adults that are in our lives. If they don't give us a satisfactory answer, then okay, where do I need to go? Let me go to the library. Let me go to a bookstore and see if I can find something like that.
That's amazing. And I think that's one thing. I love that. But I think it's one thing that we're starting to lose or lack. First, I don't want to forget this. Shout out to your family. Shout out to you. Shout out to whoever you were around and the places that you were going where you got a chance to see so much Black art or art that looks like you. Because I know so many stories that's the opposite, where they're like, I didn't see people that look like me reflected in art. So that's so beautiful that you got a chance to see that. Because that's the role that art plays. Mm-hmm. It shows us. It uplifts us. It shows our story. It tells our future. Art can be so amazing. So I'm really glad from a young person you got a chance to experience so much Black art. But then too, as far as like really diving into history to figure out where you are in life and where you're going to go in life, I feel like that's lacking now. It's so many times you hear people that are just not interested in history for whatever reason. And then we wonder why we're stuck in life, or we wonder why we're out here floating and drifting in the wind. Mm-hmm. We're not rooted. But I also realize that why a lot of African American people or melanated people in general may not be interested in history is because it's not really our history. When you go to school and you think of history, you think of, all right, who were these presidents, these white guys up here on Rushmore? Okay, the settlers came and they killed some Native Americans. All right. Like, we're not learning for real about our history. And I think that's how we start to shift where we are today in the mindsets of people by showing them some history that directly impacts you, that looks like you, that's exciting, that's amazing, that inspires you. And that's our history. That's why I keep saying our history, because
that's critically important. And to your point, that's been a situation that many of us have faced for generations.
Absolutely.
I wanted to bring, I'd be remiss if I did not bring up, the great Charles White. I usually use his story, a brother from Chicago, just an amazing, amazing artist. Had a retrospective a couple years ago where they were going over his work. But amazing artist, went to school in Chicago, but he was born in the teens. And so he was coming of age during a time where they really weren't pushing it. This was prior to the Black Arts movement. This was
right.
a different period. And he would go to the library. He would go to the library. He would just leave school and go to the library and just read. And he wanted to, again, know some history that reflected his experience. And actually, I have his, I promised I'd bring a couple of books here. This is a book, his retrospective, Charles White. And I have several books on Charles White, but he's really come back to prominence. But again, he was based in Chicago, amazing artist. And that's really what it started out for him. He did all these great murals. He go on to be known for a lot of murals, and just the way he captured Black people, presenting them in a dignified way. Because again, he was growing up in a world where you saw just these awful stereotypes of how we're presented in the world. Imagine a cartoon that you're watching, and you're a little kid, you're watching those cartoons, and they present us as savages, as if we don't have any history, we hadn't contributed anything to the world. And so he confronts that through his art. And there's so many others. I just, this book was really close to me, so I picked that up. But there's so many others. And definitely anybody watching from Chicago, there's just a tremendous intellectual history there of Black people, a lot of Black people getting together and saying, well, wait a second, we're going to confront this here and now and write ourselves into history. I I could go on and on, but I want to go back to you.
No, what we're here to get to know you and your mind and your thoughts. So whatever you need to say, feel free to say it. But I think it's really great that you brought up Charles White, because he was really young getting into this. Like he was leaving school and I need to figure this out for myself. And that's that passion and that drive that we need again. I feel like we have so many of our babies that go to school, they're not being properly educated in any form, especially not in history, but in any of the aspects of education. And they don't have a passion or a drive to learn or to figure out that self-initiative is just not there. And so I find that to be really exciting that you have that. And that's a huge part of your story. Like, I want to do it. I'm going to do it. I want to learn it. I'm going to figure out how to learn it or where it is, or I'm going to figure this thing out. And when you look at these people who are making history, who are capturing history and sharing history, that's the drive that they have. And it's a passion that we need to get back. But again, we don't know what we don't know.
That's the thing. We don't.
We don't know.
So community is so important in confronting that too. So for example, just a little bit more about me and my experience. I liked things like King Arthur. I like reading King Arthur. I liked, like I said, I liked watching stories on the ancient Egyptians. Of course, we're talking about the 90s and the early 2000s. They definitely weren't showing images of Egyptians looking like melanated people. They
right.
Looking like something else. And so that's one aspect. But then I was interested in medieval history and Western world because, again, that's what we're shown. So we're shown medieval Europe and knights and kings and all of that. And so, I would want to position myself into that, maybe position myself into that story. But I realized, okay, looking like myself, I wasn't going to just be some regular guy in a village in London somewhere in 1200, So I wanted to know, how would I be in that story? Like, if I wanted to be some knight, some black knight, okay, how would I get there? Well, that led me, I talked to different people. I have an uncle that would say something like, well, you'd be a Moor. And I was like, okay, well, then that inspired me to learn about Moors. And
okay.
And then I'd meet somebody else who'd say, well, there were, African people who invaded Spain. So you probably be speaking Spanish and you'd be more, they go back to the Moors. So I wanted to find out more about these people. And I was like in middle school at the time. And so I went to the bookstore, the local black bookstore. Shout out to Shrine of the Black Madonna in Houston, Texas. I'd go there, and wonderful Pan-African people, black nationalist people running it. And I would try to wander through there and find some books on these Moors. I'd find some books on, just different parts of West Africa. And that's what led me into these African kingdoms. You'd learn about African queens and kings and know their names, be able to name these people. And so that's another way of empowerment. So you start writing yourself into history. And then the next stage is just breaking the whole thing, because we know that we're not limited by the frames of this Western culture, because history in and of itself is a Western construct. Like it's a construct grown out of the Enlightenment. That's another because we have to get to where we make our own categories and where we build our own, build from that and how we understand the past differently. So, but anyway, I'm with
you. I'm absolutely with you. And I think one big thing that I got from your story that you just told was it was the elders around you. And they didn't have to be 80 years old to be an elder. They're older than you. They're your elders. So like the elders around you, like your uncle, like, no, that would be the Moors. Okay. But it started with you wanting to know. It started with you asking the question. And then them being able, if they couldn't tell you the whole story, they can point you in the right direction. And then you following that trail of knowledge until you ended up at the motherland with the kings and the queens and knowing their names. And that's what we need to get to. We need to get to that sharing of the history we do know. Even if you don't know everything, if you know one thing, you share that one thing with everybody who's going to listen, and some people that's not willing to listen as well. So one thing that really excites me about your story and talking to you is how far you've gone to capture history or to learn or to find out new information. And that really excites me as well. So I would love for you to share a little bit with that to the audience.
Okay, yeah. So what I want to preface everything by saying this: every community in this country that has a sizable number of Black people has Black history. There's something there. So sometimes we get into this notion that, there's only history there's only some history that came out of Harlem, like in New York. No, there are communities all over the country that we don't hear about. We might hear about Harlem, we might hear about Tulsa and the Tulsa riots and that sort of thing, but they're literally communities of people like our grandmothers and just folks, just literally ladies helping to build institutions that stand the test of time and have built history museums. I mean, I'm thinking about the Margaret Burroughs, and you just have these figures that come in and they're grabbing stuff. They're grabbing the history. They say this story needs to be told. And one of the things I'm really excited about is telling that story about what Black people did with museums. So I'm gonna stop there and go into some of the nooks and crannies that I've been to around the country that you and I have talked about. I was very fortunate to work in consulting after undergrad, and so I traveled to different cities. And when I was in those cities, I wanted to learn some of the history. And of course, I wanted to learn some of the Black history. And so one time I was in San Francisco, went to this museum. I think it was the Museum of the African Diaspora, I want to say, in San Francisco. But there was a little animated short about this gentleman named John Parker, who was an abolitionist. He freed himself from slavery and ran off. And he was an inventor, and it was like cheesy little animation, but it was cool. I was like, okay, John Parker, that's funny. I didn't know that. We didn't learn about him in school. I know about Harriet Tubman, and that's about it in terms of the Underground Railroad. And so there were these other people that were involved too. And so a couple years later, I said, he was in Ohio. I was looking on Wikipedia, and I wasn't satisfied with what they had on Wikipedia. They just said John Parker was an inventor and an abolitionist, and the pictures of he actually built factories, and he owned factories in the late 19th century. Oh, this is an interesting brother. And so, but I wasn't satisfied with what Wikipedia had. So I said, okay, he's in Ripley, Ohio. Okay, that's not too far from Cincinnati. Okay, Cincinnati's a major city. Let me go to Cincinnati. I didn't have a lot of connections in Cincinnati, really any. I had some friends that went to college there, but I went there by myself. Got a flight, got into town, and I went. There's a wonderful, magnificent museum there on the Underground Railroad that deals with that whole time in Cincinnati. So if you're ever in Cincinnati, check it out. You you owe it to yourself to see that. So amazing museum. But then I went down to Ripley, Ohio, got a rental car, just drove down there. It's maybe an hour drive from Cincinnati, maybe that. And I got to see the Ohio River. And it was a magnificent experience. I'll just leave it at that. Just riding down there and seeing that and imagining the people, because this was the borderland. This was a time when people would get to Ohio for freedom. They'd cross over the river towards freedom. So I was imagining what those people that were going over would see. And so I was seeing what they were seeing. So I went to Ripley, Ohio. His house was still there. John Parker's house was there. And I spoke with the docent that was there, and he just gave me a tour. It was open. It gave me a tour. And then he recommended, it was amazing just walking through the house and then just looking over on the other side and knowing that people were enslaved on that other side. And it was a very moving experience for me personally. But being in that space allowed me to learn much more than I could ever learn on a Google search. So when people say things like just Google it, no, let's not reduce our history to Google. Google isn't capable at this point of capturing all that we are and what we represent. So
most of it just isn't there.
It's not there. And so again, going there, if we have the opportunity to go there, let's go there. And so just being there on that ground was amazing. And so then, of course, the brother that was the docent, he said, yep, I got two new photographs today. I was like, what photographs are they? Oh, those factories. I said, the factories? I was looking for those factories. Like, yeah, here they are. And he showed them to me.
Just pulling up.
Here they are. They came in the mail like that day. He went to the mailbox while he was giving me the tour.
Look at that.
Yep, here they are. And so it was just beautiful seeing just those factories and what he did and what he risked to go to the other side for freedom. Like that was something that was key to me, because it wasn't just about me. Because he was brilliant. I mean, he was an inventor, and he had a relationship with a lot of other power brokers there. So he was able to get his inventions patented, which benefited his family financially. Of course, we know that Black people have been inventing things forever. So just being one of the first Black people to patent something just means it was patented and it was attributed to you. But there were generations of Black people that had made things that it wasn't even attributed to them. But he had a patent, and he did very well for himself and for his family. And so ultimately what happened was then he ended up, what was I going to say? So he had his inventions real quick, and then hold on for 1 second. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
See something real quick.
Yes. But for anyone who's tuning in, now's the time. If you have any questions that you want to ask of Will, go ahead and drop those down in the comments. Any questions that you may have, go ahead and put those down in the
sorry
comments.
about that.
Oh, no worries. And if you have any outside of questions, if you have any stories of falling in love with history or finding some amazing history of our own, go ahead and drop those down in the comments too, guys. We want to hear your
please
story.
Please do. And then just one thing I wanted to add, just really quick with the story. He risked everything to go back to the borderlands and try to lead people to freedom too. So that was a quick thing. That's something that I want to stay to leave that, because again, he was a successful business person, entrepreneur, but he realized that most of his people were still enslaved, and so his attitude was, I'm not free until we're all free.
Yeah.
So that's key in terms of understanding John Parker. And then just one last thing, again, I'm going to connect it back to Chicago. So this is Brother Charles Young, who was the highest ranking military officer in like the 1920s. He was good friends with W.B. Du Bois. I saw him in the DeSable Museum Charles, like one of the first times I remember seeing Charles Young. Charles Young was a military leader, all of that in the 20th century. And so he was from Maysville. And again, I'm just thinking about these different people. Everybody's connected, right? So Maysville is right across the river from Ripley, Ohio. And so, I remember hearing about Charles Young. He was a famous, again, figure in World War I, all that. There are a lot of photographs of him in different museums around Chicago. But then I ended up, the brother at the John Parker Museum sent me over to across the river to Maysville. And there was a sister who was running the Underground Railroad Museum of Maysville. And she said, yeah, Charles Young came out of here. He was famous. He's the most famous son of Maysville. Well, Charles Young, and then she talked about how John Parker mentored Charles Young. That was for me because I'm part of a Rite to Passage program where I work with teenage, boys. And it was just really moving to me because Charles Young grows on to be this famous, amazing person who's a leader in the military. And when you show any history of military in America with black people, they're going to show Charles Young. They can't tell the story without showing Charles Young. But he's connected to these communities of people in Ripley, and John Parker looked out for him. John Parker was a mentor to him and worked with him. And so that was cool too. Because later on in his life, he was able to do that to this guy who kind of paid it forward in other ways. So it's like we're all connected. That's kind of that was something that I wanted to tie in. So in towns like Ripley, Ohio, doesn't have to be huge places. Raleigh, Durham. I've been all over the country, and our history is everywhere. And one of the things you'll see is that community. That's just so powerful, and that's what allows us to move forward. That's the connections that we build in our communities.
I think that's so powerful, and I'm really glad you tied it into Charles Young, because that just speaks to one thing that I feel like we're missing, but we're starting to rebuild. I feel like in this era that we're in, this generation is starting to rebuild that bridge of community. I feel like at some point, can't pinpoint where it happened in history, but at some point we got really disconnected and everything became really individualized, like my family, my household, or just me. But when we talk about like Black Wall Street and we talk about all of these really artists, oh my God, artists back in the day, like all of them knew each other, all of them helped each other, all of them put each other on. Are you performing over here? All right, I'm doing a reading over here. They worked together. It was a movement. And I think that's what's really powerful, because they worked together and it was a movement. And then when we started to think really individualistically is where a lot of the demise and downfall came into play, because we need each other. We need to support each other. We need to help build each other. We need to uplift each other. And that's how all of the greatness starts, with helping each other. And you never know where that can go. And when you're talking about sharing and passing history on to the next generation, yes, of course, again, tell your elders that didn't know, tell your sister, tell your brother, but like really feeding it into our babies, like the children, the young people, they're the future. And so I like to say this all the time too, because we always tend to look at the younger generation. We go, oh, these kids, oh my God, they're this, they're that, and they get a bad rap, but it's like we created them. We're their mothers, we're their fathers, we're their aunties, we're their uncles. So whatever they are, we help to create. So if we want to see a difference in our future, we have to put it into the babies. We have to give them the history, give them the knowledge, so that they can continue to perpetuate it and move it forward. And so to take a young man under his arm and show him the ropes, or mentor him, and he becoming who he became, Charles Young, this military greatness, right? That's the goal. Like that's what we all should be striving towards. And there's so many ways you can look directly into history and pinpoint that. Like you mentioned, the rites of passage programs. The men and the tribe or the community would take these young boys and say, this is what you need. This is how you become. This is what your roles are. And that's important. And we really lack that. And there's a whole lot of reasons why we lack that systematically and otherwise, but we got to get it back by any means necessary, because to build up our community is to pass on our history, to share our history, and then to create an amazing future.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And one of the things I wanted to kind of focus on is the individualistic elements that you pointed to. Very much a part of modern, like Western life and thinking. And
Absolutely.
you start seeing more of this desegregation. When you see generations of people that are that can move out of the segregated neighborhoods, can move out and move into other parts
Come
of
on.
the community in the city, you get separated in that
Come
way.
on.
Part of the core and the connectedness in the community breaks down, and so then what are we left with? It didn't benefit everybody, and really, if we look back on it, we can make the argument that didn't benefit most people because
Of
you're
color.
right. Well, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about other people.
Yeah.
If we're brought into this home and it's just our nuclear family and we don't care what's going on outside of that, then you start seeing collectively we're falling. But you pointed out the rites of passage. We have to get back to some of our older traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's rites of passage, not just in terms of initiation and adulthood, though that's very important, but all kinds of ways in which the community get together.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of cultivating spaces where we can exchange ideas informally. Where it's not just. I mean, and the church does that. There are places where the church does that. Some of our schools do that. But we need more of those spaces. That's why it's so great to have a place like the Southside Community Arts Center because of its existence, then people are coming together and building in that way.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's really special that you said is like cultivating those spaces and making sure we go back to what we originally did, what our ancestors did. I'm actually currently in a rites of passage program, which isn't necessarily like lifting me into womanhood, but healing and learning what those things are that our ancestors used to do and how important those roles and pieces are so that we can push that again forward to our future generation. And knowing how important the things we say, knowing how important the things we teach them, how that impacts the larger community at large. Because we do a disservice to our children when we're not fully educating them and preparing them for the world that they're about to enter into. Because they get out here and they think life is one way and then they go, whoa.
Yeah.
That is not what this is. And so I feel like we have to come together as a community, as a village, as a tribe, which is what we are.
Yeah.
That's the only way things are going to change. But we have to look back at how our ancestors did it to do it effectively. We've definitely talked about it, and you all out there may have heard me talk a little bit about it as well. The documentary that I created called At Their Feet. When we think about like our ancestral lineage and we say we got to get back to what our ancestors used to do, you think far back. You're like, we got to go all the way back to Africa. Yeah, we definitely do. Don't get me wrong. But you can start as simple as going to talk to your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about African American, I mean, my air quotes there. When we talk about African American history, it really hasn't been that long for real. Like slavery in the larger scheme of things really wasn't that long ago. Civil rights movement, like segregation, that was like your grandmother. That was like sometimes your mother and your auntie.
Mm-hmm.
So like these things weren't that long ago. So if we talk to them, if we hear their stories, if we sit at their feet and really take in the knowledge that they have to offer, we can incorporate some of the things that they did into our lives. And we won't have to reinvent the wheel because I feel like a lot of that is happening where we don't know what happened to them. We don't know what they went through. We don't know their joys, their accomplishments. So we don't know how to implement that into our lives. So we're just starting stuff over. But we just got to keep pushing the wheel that they've already built.
Mm-hmm.
And add a little 2021
add a little bit of our own flavor to it. But that's right. This society discourages that, right? This society collectively, I'm talking about just American society in general, it doesn't. It's so against the past. Like, again, it's almost like a microwave memory that a lot of people have. We have the memory of a fruit fly or something because we're constantly looking forward. It's this forward-looking element to American life that I think. Well, yeah, that's what Sankofa again can confront that if we're thinking through those logics, then it can confront that, and we know what we need to do for our people. And what I'm saying is that we can't be surprised that there are people that don't know what happened 5 years before they were born, because this society, when we go out of these kinds of spaces that you and I are in, go out to the world, that's so discouraged by the society. So you have kids that don't remember what happened a few years before, and if the elders are reluctant, and sometimes some of them they're reluctant for various reasons to talk about it. When they're reluctant, then whole generations, whole histories of families can be lost like that. And so we have to do the work in our time to document, to tell the stories in whatever way we can. You're using film, you're recording and editing and talking to these elders and documenting that. But then we have to do that. We have to document what we're doing, and then we need to make sure we model that for the people that are coming after us.
Oh, what I really like about what you just said was we have to document theirs, but we also have to document ours, because we're going to be the elders one day. And I think because of also, I think it's Western civilization's thing as well. Like, we don't want to grow old. We're not thinking about us getting old one day. We're not thinking about being elders. We right here, right now. Okay.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, the way time flies, we're going to blink and we're going to be the elders. We're going to be the grandparents over in the rocking chair. You know, we still might be flat. Because I know I'm going to still be flat.
Oh, yeah, me too.
But we're going to be those elders. And so if we didn't document what we did, how can we pass that on to the future generation? And as far as this civilization, Western culture, always looking into the future. Yeah, we should be looking in the future. That's what I was just talking about. We're going to be elders one day. We should look that far so we can prepare the young people. But I feel like they look to the future and only to the future and not the past, because their past tells their truth. And if we look too far into the past, we see their truth. And if we see their truth, we're going to realize our greatness, if that makes sense. So I feel like Western civilization is so focused on the future. Just look ahead. Look, new phone. Oh, look, new, like all these new things coming out. Look in the future. Because if we really look in the past, you see who's the monster. It negates all of the things that they've been telling us we're not forever. If you say, you know, the famous line, if you want to hide something from a black person, put it in a book, right? But we wrote the first books, though.
Right.
That was us. Mathematics, okay. Astrology, okay. Medicine, that was all us. We taught you, actually. So if we look too far back, we'll pull the blindfold off. And they don't want us to pull the blindfold off. That's what makes history so powerful. But they can't destroy it. They can hide it. But all you gotta do is lift up a couple rocks and you'll find it. Like, you know. So it's there, and there's people who again lived it. So you can't lie about it. Like, genuinely, to the masses, they've been lying to us in our history books, on the news for forever. But there's people that lived it. That's what's so important about talking to the elders that are still here, and then looking at the lives that our ancestors left and the trails, the breadcrumbs that they left us to lead us back to our greatness and to our true story and who we truly are. Because if we keep allowing them to tell our stories, it's going to always be wrong. It's going to always have us less than. When we are not less than. You want to be real honest. We're greater than, okay? We literally taught them, but they controlled the pen. And I think that's what's so powerful about knowing your history and sharing your history, is that when you have the knowledge and then you control the story and you can tell the truth, you can change the world. You can change your mind. You can change the life. You can change the trajectory of a culture.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that's what's so magical about history. And if you would have asked me as a young person, because people call me a historian, okay? I've done.
I mean, community historians. That's what I mean. That's what I refer to as too. That's okay.
And I'm okay with that. But if you would have asked young Natalie, I'd have told you was wilding. Like, what do you mean? No, sir. I don't even like history because it wasn't my history.
Right.
As soon as I started to really get into African and African American history, it was a wrap. I was involved. I was engrossed. I was in love because I was finding me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was finding out the truth about me and everyone who looks like me.
Mm-hmm.
And once you know your truth and you get to love yourself, you can love everybody who looks like you. And I feel like that plays a role in where we are as a society as well. We don't love ourselves. So it's easy not to love people who look like us.
Mm-hmm.
But history will help you love yourself. Like,
and just joining that to the art part, the art piece, it's like, okay, well, some people may not get into a library. Some people, hopefully they can get into a museum. Hopefully they can get into other spaces, because it's so difficult unless you just destroy it. It's so difficult to hide art. You see an image of Nefertiti. You can't get rid of that. I mean, they can try to destroy it, but it speaks for itself.
yeah.
The imagery, the stories that exist on the obelisks in in ancient Ethiopia, they speak for themselves. So there were European explorers that tried to take that away. We look at I'm thinking about the Yoruba sculptures all over West Africa and in places like Nigeria, the Ife, and so a lot of those sculptures were taken and whisked away, and many of them are in the British Museum. I went to the UK and I should have shared that picture, when I was looking at them, because they literally went into Benin and destroyed some of those kingdoms, like the palaces in Benin, and they have these beautiful stories. They tell their history on their walls. That's another thing. And I don't know, we probably won't have time to go into the history on the walls in Houston, but histories on the walls in Benin, and no, not Benin, the Dahomian people. And so they took the pieces and whisked it away to the UK. So now you can see the largest number are in the British Museum, but they have them in collections across Europe. There's still a few in Nigeria, but many of them are still in these European cultural capitals.
And that's a whole nother story. Like, why do you have all our assets?
No, that's imperialism. That's what that is. They're taking it like, no, it belongs to us now, because that's what happens when those Europeans go into war. Okay, we're going to take your stuff, and it's ours now.
It's beautiful.
The great art comes to us because we beat you. So
even though it was there already, like it was.
Doesn't matter. We're taking it, and now it belongs in London, because again, if we look at the origins of like Western museums and all, if we look at World's Fairs, it was for them to show their empire and educate their public to the empire. Okay, these are imperial possessions. These people that we put in cages, which they would show them at World's Fairs, they put people and present them. These are at the far corners of our empire. These animals are from other corners of our empire. This artwork is from our other colonial possessions, because these people are up under our foot, and we're going to keep them there. And that's the logic.
That's basically like Christopher Columbus saying he founded America when people were already living here.
It grows out of Columbus, and and then we can go into the Portuguese as well, but it grows out of that age of exploration. That wasn't good for us. So the
thing was, you were excited that you were exploring and you wanted to take and claim and show, but like Africans have been exploring for years. We just wasn't taking people's stuff.
It's a different understanding of the world. That's another key. Like they have the roots of their understanding. The universe is different. So the way they relate to the world is different. So in some, again, Europeans, if we look at the Enlightenment, there are certain ways of how you relate to the world. That philosophical viewpoint is very different from African people, from indigenous people. The concept of ownership, that I own this land because I set foot on it. No, I mean, we're all humans. We all relate to the world. They're animals. They're all these living things. There are all these other living things that are here. I don't own anything. I didn't make the world. Right. Our creator made us, and we're just here, and we're going to try to cultivate it and live with these other people. But Westerners say, hey, nah, we own this land, and we're gonna shoot you if you have a problem.
Right. So, well, you got to pay us to live here now, even though you was here first.
You got to pay us, and this is how we're gonna organize the world. So again, that's just critical. I mean, we have to first understand that so then we can overcome that. Because even in our spaces, like we're looking at museums, we're transforming what museums are at their core. Like if we think about museums as a way of taking something out of its original context and then presenting it, because that's what a lot of museums are. They're just taking out of the context. We're just having a white wall around it, and then we're displaying this African mask. What is that? So the intervention that, you know, melanated people made was to transform what these things can be. It's a role. It has a role in community, like Southside Community Arts Center. It has a role in education in terms of how HBCUs have used their museums, education in the community, education for their own art students. That's how we transform it, because this ain't for us. Like these museums are anti-life. I mean, they're cool. I like the British Museum. It's amazing. It has so much stuff. You know, and I show respect and love to them, you know, and all that. I'll show respect and all that. But we have to, if we want a better world, we got to do things differently. We can't replicate what's there. So.
Yes, that just hit my soul, Will. That just hit my soul. If we want a better world, we got to do things differently. Yeah. Like, that just hit my soul. We cannot keep it going. It's not sustainable. It's not the law of the universe. It's not the law of love. And really, that's all there is. Like, whew, that's a whole. We ain't gonna get into the philosophical conversation of that. But it doesn't follow the laws of the universe. It will not sustain, and it will self-destruct. And we cannot keep it going in that way, because that's not what our people did. That's not our history. That's not who we are. And then again, that goes back to the importance of really knowing our history and learning who we are, what our values are, and what's been forced upon us. When you know better, you're supposed to do better. And that's the thing. We got to make sure the ones who know, ourselves and others, and because we're still learning every day. Nobody knows everything. A wise person knows that they know nothing. Right? But the ones who know something, we have to share with everybody. Because like the brother you was talking about from Ohio, we ain't free till we all free. No matter what I have to lose, no matter what I have to put in jeopardy, no matter if it's my life, my business, or otherwise, I need to use what I have, my mind, body, soul, money, whatever it is, to make sure that I make sure my people are free. Because how can I live my best life over here living lavish when I know my people are over there still struggling? And I think that goes into our society right now when we look at our celebrities.
Oh, yeah.
And our lawyers and our doctors and these Black people that have got on, you know, they're on. Yeah. But what are they doing to help the rest of us? Because we still live in America. We still face these same things. What are we doing to change that? So we have to look back at history and figure out how we can use our history to solidify our place in the future. Because that's the only way that we really can. By knowing who we are, whose we are, what we can do, what we're capable of, and reclaiming our power. And we do that throughout history because it's a magical thing. When you can tell me a slave can come straight out of slavery with nothing but the shirt on their back and become a millionaire. Yeah. Open factories. And like sponsor businesses. Like people literally were like from slave to millionaire. Of course, there was a process in between that. But the fact that it was done, what can't you do in 2021?
Exactly.
I need not to hear nothing. You could do everything, anything, if you put your mind to it and you knew who you were. If you knew who you were. Right. So many of us have no idea who we are. And that's that part. And so leading into my next part of that, because we kind of flowed into it perfectly, actually, of once you know the information, share the information, and then the importance of sharing that information. Well, how do you share that information? How do you keep pushing history forward? And if it's not what you are doing, what would you like to do?
Okay. No, great questions. So I think there are myriad ways that you can connect people. And so for me, it's all about connecting people through telling stories. So some of it might just be traditional, like art historical writing, which I do some of that. I wanted to protect and preserve the artistic tradition that I grew out of. So as one example, I started volunteering at the University Museum at Texas Southern because I was introduced to the artwork there. And there's a connection. I'm just real quick. I'm going to go into the connection. So
Go ahead.
Charles White, again, we talked about him earlier. Great muralist, very young artist. He wanted to. He applied for a fellowship and to paint a work of art throughout the country. He wanted to go to an HBCU, so he chose to do his piece at an HBCU. He ended up going to Hampton. Okay, just that was the school. He did a great mural there called "The Contribution of the Negro to Democracy," I believe, and you can view it at Hampton today. Okay, so that's one of Charles White's works. He was a young man. He taught some courses at Hampton. One of the students that he taught was John Thomas Biggers. Okay, John Biggers. Here's his book. So this is John Biggers, some of his early work. I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, yeah.
No, I see it.
View from the upper room, and but his work evolved over time. John Biggers became known as an amazing muralist. He founded the art department. He'd go on to found the art department at Texas Southern University. Okay, and later on, again, this was just one of the students that Charles White worked with. John Biggers assisted him with the mural paintings. I always say that Charles White initiated John Biggers into the tradition. So Charles White may have been like 24. And so he's working with like an 18-year-old John Biggers, and they became lifelong friends. Cannot tell the story without talking about the unbelievable Elizabeth Catlett.
Yes.
That we're going to talk about. Yeah, she has a relationship with Chicago. Again, Elizabeth Catlett. So Charles White and Elizabeth Catlett were there. They were married at the time. They were mentoring John Biggers and Samuel Lewis. You know who that is. She wrote a number of amazing art historian. You can still watch some videos of John Biggers and Samuel Lewis like on YouTube and stuff like them talking at different art festivals. But it's just dope because they were students at that time, just some young black kids. That's what's so powerful about. I mean, they were teenage, they were young people, but they were there and they were being mentored by these other art teachers who weren't that old either. They were 20 something.
This is making me happy.
And so, but what's cool about also is there's some people that have written plays about the relationship, the dynamics between those four artists at Hampton Institute in Virginia in the it would have been like the 40s, like the early 40s. And so again, I think about that. But real quick, so John Biggers founded the art department, had a lot of challenges because he was developing this in Houston in the 1940s and 50s. He traveled to Africa back when a lot of black artists were trying to go to France and places like that. He went to Africa and wanted to get connected there. And he came back, and he's some Pan-Africanist talking in Houston, Texas, using all this African symbolism in the 1950s. So a lot of people were really feeling that. That was a little too avant-garde, supposedly, for a lot of people. But he trained generations of black and Latino artists. He engaged with the history of the Mexican muralist movement. That was one of the reasons he was attracted to Texas. So he traveled throughout Mexico. And so the campus is filled with murals. And so I love the intellectual genealogy that speaks to, because Charles White, again, initiated him into that mural tradition. Charles White did some murals, but he's not known as a mural painter. But then John Biggers took it and ran with it. And then he has students. So now there's generations of students from the 40s all the way to 2010 that filled the halls of the administration building at Texas Southern with these different murals. I sent you some of them. Mm-hmm. And so for me, so then my great uncle introduced me to the murals when I was a kid, just took me there. And it was amazing. It was like your brain explodes because you see these huge murals, and there's like over 120 of them all over the campus, but also in this building. And I wanted to protect those because some of the murals, it became a very complex issue, but and I'm not going to go into all the politics at the university, but there were some people that wanted to destroy the murals. There were some people that didn't see value in the murals. And so each generation, it's up to each generation to try to protect it, to see value in it, and as the community to make sure that we protect it. So one of the things I wanted to do was volunteer there and work with the people that were on the front lines of protecting that tradition, because those murals spoke to ultimately what inspired my art. That was the core. I grew out of this tradition, this Gulf Coast tradition, and so that tradition, that intellectual genealogy, it's all this on display in the works. So when people say I didn't know that there were Black people that did art, you hear people that say that are like our age that say I wasn't introduced to that. But this speaks to that, right?
Right.
There was no Black people doing this or that in their history. No, these students were talking about it. These artists were writing it and creating imagery around it on their walls. So that refutes anything to suggest that we're less than or whatever. But beyond that, it shows that we're able to think outside of those categories. This isn't just an administration building. We're going to put some flavor into it. This is a temple of art. I call it the temple of our imagination. It's a temple to the imagination. We're going to do things differently. And it's
which is not what you think of when you think of an administration building.
Right. It's not going to be just some regular administration building. We're going to do something else. And that's what I love. That extraness is something that's so unique to our experience. And I love it. Yeah, with a little, you sprinkle some flavor to it. They add nothing like the flavor at that administration building. And so it's that, so that's one way. I try to give tours to kids and elders alike so that they know that this is there. And I work in community-based organizations, volunteer in public schools. There's different spaces there. And it's really easy to get involved because if you don't have to get paid for it, there are people who want you to help. There's a lot of people that need a lot of help to do things, but because often we're trained to chase the dollar, we're not willing to do that. And we're not often, we may not be able to find the time to be involved in these organizations, but there are organizations every city all over the country. They're in Chicago, they're in Houston, they're in Raleigh, Durham, they're in Tulsa, and it's beautiful when we get a chance, if we get a chance to try to connect with these communities, because we find that we have a lot of the same challenges. And so that's one of the things I want to do is connect that. I want to, I'm going to get one other book real quick. This one's called Conserve, a Legacy. I got this back. I found this at the Houston Public Library. I thought it was really cool. It talks about the history of museums at historically Black colleges and universities. So it shows campus museums throughout the country. And I ended up going to a lot of these museums later on, just visiting. And they respond to their community. It's just different. Again, we have a different flavor. We play.
I quite like it.
No, there's just a difference in how we roll, and that's cool. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So so the next project, and hopefully we can work together on it, is just a way where we can, tell this story to larger numbers of people. Actually go and tell the story of Spelman's gallery. Tell the story of Clark Atlanta, their museum. There's so many. Fisk has a magnificent museum, and they all have different histories. If you're ever in Houston, anybody out there, if you're ever in Houston, come by the University Museum at Texas Southern. We'd love to have you. So I think those are ways that we can build community, and that's the way that we can ensure our survival. Because if we don't know who we are, then we can't move forward. We're just floating around in space. So we have to tell these stories continuously. It's a continuous thing. Every generation, we have to constantly tell it so that we can then do the work to move forward.
That was a perfect explanation mark. It wasn't even a period. It was the exclamation mark at the end of the sentence. Okay, that was perfect. I'm done, y'all. Will said it. Perfect. But one thing I do want to speak on that you mentioned that hit my soul. You said so many different things that hit my soul, but one in particular was within your story of your great uncle taking you to the murals, and how from that moment, now you as an adult at this museum working to do just that, the wheel from little wheel to to adult wheel, and making it happen, and now showing other children hey, this is a thing, and impacting other children That's the passion we have to have with our history, because if we don't have that type of passion, it won't happen. Because like you said, so many museums and art institutions and historical institutions, African American institutions, are struggling. And it's because the mantle hasn't been passed to that next generation. We have to be the ones to save them. Our elders, I say this all the time, our elders, our ancestors, they've done their job already. It's our turn. And if we don't do it, we'll see them go away. And we can't have that. I'm not even going to say what that would be. We can't have that. Like, we have to be the ones as young people preparing the next generation at the same time to keep these places alive, because they are absolutely necessary, because our history is absolutely necessary. So again, once you know better, you have to do better. It's an absolute mandatory thing for us to progress, because as you so eloquently said, if we don't know our history, we definitely can't make it into the future. Not the way we need to be, not thriving, and not just surviving. Because we're amazing. And once you really look at the history to tell you that and back that up, you'll live in that energy and the world will change around you. So, well, I don't want to take too much more of your time. I want to say thank you for being here. Again, great conversation as we always have.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure.
I appreciate you. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate your drive. I appreciate your sense of community. I appreciate what you do. It's truly, truly amazing. And like you were talking, I was getting excited. Like, it really makes me happy just to hear you speak about your passion and your love and what you're doing. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing with everyone out there. Thank all of you all out there for being here with us, for tuning in, for giving us your time. And Will, if you could just close out beautifully with your message, but if you can close out people with how they can get in contact with you to see more of your art, to see the art at the museum, all of that.
Oh, yes. Okay. So, I didn't share any of the artwork I make, but we're on.
You can do that now if you would like.
Well, yeah, we can, or I don't even know how to share it, but I do want to say that we're at University Museum, or UMuse, at TSU. We're on Instagram and social media. Then I'm also on Ushindi Mag, USHINDI Mag, MAG, on Instagram. And so a lot of my artwork deals with, again, how do we engage the past? And again, Ushindi is just the Kiswahili word for victory. And I will close with that. So I think that there's these long traditions of the double V for victory, if we're talking about World War II, and victory as it relates to how we define it in the Black community. I think that each of us has to define it for ourselves, but we have to remember that not everybody's on our team. So we need to be very critical about who we roll with. And so working with you, Natalie, just having you as a comrade is just awesome. I love the work that you're doing as a community historian, and what you're doing in media, and it's absolutely necessary. But everybody can't be your comrade. And so
that's fair.
No, everybody doesn't have the same terms of victory. So with that, I'll say check out Ushindi Mag, ushindimag.com, and on Instagram. And then, of course, we're at University Museum on Instagram. Just look us up. But we'd love to have you if you're in Houston. We're trying to, again, move over to that. We're trying to improve our capabilities to have more online exhibitions. So we're working towards that. Great
awesome. Team. Well, y'all find Will, check out the University Museum, and look, we working together, Will. We're gonna bring this historian love, the Black culture love, mixed with the art love, mixed with the media love, and we're gonna bring something special. Y'all heard it here first, okay? This is a Free Your Mind Friday exclusive. Don't be a surprise when y'all see us working together, bringing y'all this information and this knowledge from across the country, maybe across the world, okay? Yeah. Exclusive. You heard it here first. Well, again, thank you so much, Will. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Free Your Mind Friday. I can't say it any other way than that way. I have to sing it every time. And we'll catch y'all next week. We're here every Friday at 6 p.m. And again, this was brought to you by the Healing Academy. Be on the lookout for some amazing information dropping from the Healing Academy really, really soon. And until next week, I'll see ya. See you, Will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.